We're really appreciative of you all setting aside some time to be in this conversation. This is the second of our conversations that we are putting under this title of Marooning. And this is this year with the Arson HD, we have a plan that has like 4 different strands of them. And there are folks on this call who can explain those different strands, but I won't do that right now. You can see that on our website. But one of them is around maroonage or marronage, as some people would say. And the theme that we're trying to explore, and I want to give a shout out to Becca Zala, who posted something about this, and then we decided to kind of try to build on it in our base camp, in our little online community. And it's like the theme of escape. That an escape, a kind of like more place of freedom, but of course you still have the white empire is still there, but you have people who had intentions to get away and make a space, whether it was a family of 5 in a forest or communities of thousands in the hills of Brazil. In a forest in South Carolina, a family, and then you have thousands in Brazil as one comparison. There's this grand range. And I think that even in the Hill District, it could be thought of as a place to escape to, a place to escape from. And that I think that we'll hear in the stories of the women that we're gonna listen to tonight, women who crafted out different spaces of freedom for themselves and for other people, and were very intentional that they were going to create more space for Black people to express, to learn, to be. And I'm just looking forward to this next conversation about what that looks like. What are other ways of being free if we can't take over the state tomorrow and eliminate it and be completely and totally free? What are those interim steps? And how could the Hill District be continue on a history that it's had about doing that? So I'm gonna kick it back to Kendra to introduce our speakers, and just personally want to thank them. I've heard a little bit of the stories and it was so inspiring. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Justin. And thank you folks as you're joining, just welcome to tonight's conversation. I don't know if you noticed, but we are recording this conversation because we feel like there's gonna be some valuable exchange and conversation and information that will be shared. And we wanna make sure that other folks in the community are able to access this at a later point. So just keep that in mind. We will have an opportunity also at some point in tonight's session for questions from the audience. But if at any point throughout everyone's, kind of talks or their presentations, if you have a question or a comment that you want to just get out before you forget, please feel free to put it in the chat. And at some point we will have a moderated question section where we can address those and have a conversation. So before I introduce our speakers, I want to just give a little background. Justin just kind of described the impetus behind the entire kind of series of conversations around Black marriage, Black marooning, in terms of like, where all that came from as we started to think about as artists and culture workers in the Hill District. What are the ways that we help, maintain it as a space for Black liberation? And for me, over the past, I guess 7+ years since I've been back in Pittsburgh, I've really been exploring, in particular, not exclusively, the ways that Black women in these communities, and specifically the district, have modeled a kind of Black liberation, even if they haven't necessarily called it out in a specific way, which led me, not being from the Hill District, but having ties from my childhood to the Hill District through where we worshiped as a child in Macedonia, to family and friends in the community, and other ways I participated by taking voice lessons at the Hill House with one of the folks that we're going to talk about today, one of the women we're going to talk about today. It just really struck me that so many Black women from this community, or who have actually not even lived in the community in some cases, but had just done some work in this community or passed through this community, have had such an impact on the Hill District, but on the world and on me specifically. And a lot of their stories haven't been told widely. Some of their names are not even familiar to people who live there or from this community or from Pittsburgh in general. So I thought it important and to make sure that we, call those names out and be able to make those connection points between their legacy and what's going on. Even this, it's so timely, even on what's going on like right now, like with the ribbon cutting for the Negro Opera House. We'll find out why that's so important. So many things that are going on today. A lot of connections can be drawn to the women that we're going to talk about tonight. I have a passion for exploring the stories of Black women in this community who have done a lot to maintain it as a space for Black folks, Black arts, Black culture, and Black liberation. And so tonight we're going to talk about three special women legacy keepers who graced their presence either by living, working, playing, contributing to the Hill District and to the world. Dr. Selma Burke, Miss Olabrise Beckham, and Dr. Maisha Baton. And I'm not going to give you background information on those women because the folks that are here talking today are going to do that for us. So I'm going to introduce our speakers who will talk and speak to each of these amazing women and get out of your way and give them each time to give a presentation and give some information about the women that they've come to talk about. Our first speaker will be Terry Baltimore. Many of you may be familiar with Terry. Terry has a company called Urban Excursions, LLC. Terry is a graduate of Duquesne University and has over 30 years of experience working in the nonprofit sector. She is a tour guide, which is keep saying it lightly because she's more than that, introducing national, international, and local visitors to the historic Hill District, one of Pittsburgh's storied African-American neighborhoods. Past projects include the Green Print, the Hill District's award-winning Green Plan, the development of August Wilson Park, the Dot Tally Center, and public art projects. Previous affiliations include the Ujamaa Collective, the August Wilson House, Leadership Pittsburgh Incorporated, and inaugural Pathways Community Fellow at the Center for Engaged Teaching and Research at Duquesne University. And just a moment, Terry will be talking to us about Dr. Selma Burke. I guess I'm gonna, you know what? Instead of doing the next introduction, I'll go ahead and let Terry talk and then I'll introduce our next speaker. So I'll give the floor or give the mic to Terry Baltimore.
Good evening, everybody. I came to be obsessed by and fall in love with Selma Burke, and it was quite by accident. I always describe her as the coolest woman I never met. I worked at the Hill House Association, and there was a renovation that was being done to the Kaufman Auditorium. And one afternoon I look up and these guys are wheeling in this sculpture that was on the side of the building. And they were like, we were told we should bring it to you. And this incredible piece of artwork just spoke to my soul. And I didn't know anything about Dr. Burke except that she ran the Selma Burke Art Center. And having this piece in my office for a couple of years made me curious about her life, her work, and her connection to the Hill District. So I started to do some reading about her and was just amazed that even as a child, she had a passion for sculpture. She would go to this little rivulet behind their house, grab clay, and as a child would start molding this clay into figures. And so it struck me that this woman knew who she was and what she was destined to be, even when she was a child. And so I started to read about her life because I was really interested in this incredibly elegant statue that featured a man and a woman cradling a baby between them. And so when I first started to learn about her, I went through the archives at Hill House and realized that there was nothing there. So there was no information about how this statue landed at Hill House, how it landed in the Hill, and why Dr. Burke chose to sculpt this piece. So I started to investigate her life, realized that her papers were at Spelman College, made relationships with the archivist at Spelman, and over the years, got a chance to read some of her writings and understand on a deeper level the importance of this sculpture. So this sculpture is one that she gave to the neighborhood in 1975. And it was really a piece that still is shrouded in some mystery, because we don't know why she chose the Hill, why she chose Hill House, and how she came to choose this particular set of images for the Hill. But the thing that I've learned after reading about her is that she spent a lot of her energy as an artist, and she described herself as a people's artist, doing figures and doing lots of figures of families and family units and mothers and children. And so I started to realize that the presence of family and those deep ties were really important to her. And I started to do some reading and was intrigued by the work that she did before she did the sculpture in 1975. And that was her creation of the Selma Burke Art Center in East Liberty. She described herself as wanting to create a space that gave young people and folks in the community the opportunity to be creative, to give them a space that didn't exist before, to give them the opportunity to explore what it meant to live in their own skin, to live in the places where they lived, and to find beauty in those places and beauty in their expression of their lives in those places. And so what's really been incredible for me is that even though the Selma Burke Art Center closed in 1981, the line of inspiration and the line of influence from her life continues to flow. There are artists like Charlotte Ka, who worked with Dr. Burke, who not only worked with her, but helped to craft in part what the Selma Burke Art Center was. And that it was going to be the space that allowed African Americans to express themselves in a lot of different ways, and encourage people to think about their Afrocentric lives and to use those images, those words, to begin to explore who they were, and how they could present that to the world. She also created a space that incubated a number of other opportunities that still exist today. So some of the women artists who were instructors at the Selma Burke Art Center started Women of Visions. And so she created a space that allowed people to think not just about the work they were doing at Selma Burke, but like what other kinds of ways could they use their voices to move forward? In this case, the notion of African American women artists having a space that they claim for themselves and creating this opportunity that's lasted all these years for them to continue kind of the legacy that was started at the Selma Burke Art Center. I have spent a lot of time looking at her life, and I'm still learning things about her every day. And I had shared with Kendra that I'm actually changing my life and my passion to follow this project, and it will grow in July. I'm actually going to be leaving my job and spending time continuing to do research about her and writing about her, because she is a woman that has an incredible legacy that's not just in Pittsburgh, but it's also a national legacy. And none of the literature reflects her influence at all. So there's very little written about her and her work and her time in Pittsburgh. And so the next phase of my life is a passion project. And that is to research and write about her and to make sure that people know her name and that she's not just somebody whose name might be remembered by the people who were connected to the school, but to be thinking about how do we help folks know the legacy that she created, and how can we begin to encourage other people to follow her lead, to follow their passion as artists, and to find ways that they can use their creativity, whether it's music or dancing or singing or photography or filmmaking, to express their lives and their hopes as African Americans. I see her work as being absolutely freeing at a time when African American artists had limited opportunities. She was one of those folks who was able to open doors and bring in local artists, national artists, and everyday folks into the same space to have a conversation about what does it mean to be an artist? What does it mean to be a dancer? What does it mean to appreciate and hold up our legacy as African Americans, and make sure that people know that this is a legacy that is honored and held up and really shown in the light. And so I wish I had met Dr. Burke, and part of my work is actually going to be interviewing people who knew her, so I can find out more intimately about how she influenced folks to do the work that they're continuing to do. And again, to tell that story. All of the women that we're talking about tonight have changed the world in huge ways. And our role and our responsibility is tell the world how they changed the spaces that they inhabited. And so I am looking forward to the conversation and the questions. And I will just say one last thing about Dr. Burke before I step back, and that is every single one of us carries her with us every day. So whether people know it or not, she actually created the image of President Roosevelt that appears on the dime. She was originally commissioned to do that image of FDR as an installation on the Recorder of Deeds building in Washington, DC. And the Secretary of the Treasury used that image and put his initials on the coin. And so one of the stories that people need to know is that we walk around with her art in our pockets every day. And it's those small things that all of us need to know so that we are beginning to claim space and to claim our legacy in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. That is so powerful. That's so powerful. Like I got chills, got a little emotional just thinking about, yes, I knew about the coin, but thinking about the direct lineage to Miss Charlotte and to Women of Visions, to this day, it's just it's so powerful. And thinking about folks, on this call who are artists in their own right, who have been, even though we never got to meet her, how she has touched our lives, and how so many of us may not have even known her story or her name. So thank you. And I look forward to talking more about Dr. Burke in conversation with the other speakers, but also with the audience and participants with questions. So thank you for that. That was powerful. And I'm so happy for you to be able to embark on that journey to tell her story. Those are the most powerful books, are those stories when people like, it's a story in my belly that I got to get out, and I have to drop everything to do it. We are very honored to have you as a historian in our community. And so I'm just wanted to say thank you. All right, so we will continue and learn more about Dr. Selma Burke. If you just joined, Terry Baltimore gave a powerful profile and drew a really strong connection, much more direct connection between Dr. Selma Burke, internationally renowned artist in Pittsburgh, the Hill District specifically, as well as East Liberty. And there's so much connection between those two communities anyway, that's a whole nother session that we could have about, those two communities together. So we're going to talk about, hold on, I have to let somebody in. Now we are going to talk about Miss Olabreeze Beckham. But today to present on Miss Beckham is her daughter, Miss Lugenie Beckham. Lugenie is the daughter of Olabreeze and Charles Beckham. Her first job was working as a piano teacher in the Beckham Freeman Music Studio at the age of 13. She had a number of after-school and Saturday events. Under her mother's tutelage, she learned the value of entrepreneurship. Lugenie attended IUP and later began her career as an executive administrative support, working for Mellon Bank in the legal department, and was administrative support to the board of directors. After 20 years with Mellon, she began working in higher education as an assistant to the provost at University of Pittsburgh. She moved on to work for the board of trustees at CMU, and during the 90s became involved in the struggles for our people, which started to her to drive to make a change. She became an activist fighting for our rights. She fought against police brutality as one of the leaders who fought for justice for Mania Bay, who was murdered by the Pittsburgh police. She fought against educational injustices and fought for equitable housing. Lugenie co-founded after-school program in the Belsuver community called Teenage Awareness Program. This brought out one particular reality that our young men, Black men, are suffering. To counteract the increasing violence and drug activity, TAP began to show our youth there are options, that you have choices. They took youth and dared them to value life and change. And she said she can honestly say it worked. How? By providing youth lost to the streets an opportunity for employment and mentors that only wanted the best for them. In 2009, after her mom, Ms. Olabreeze Beckham, passed away, she began working at Community Empowerment Association, where she was home and was able to make change and possibilities through an after-school program. Our workforce development and training opportunities and mental health services. She retired from CEA in 2019, and in 2020 left Pittsburgh and relocated to Las Vegas for health reasons. So I can give to you, Ms. Lugenie Beckham. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if I have to, let me see. If you can unmute. I think you might be muted, Eugenie. There you go.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, and it's an honor to be here today. It's funny, when I was listening to Terry talk about Selma Burke, I remember my mother insisting that I attend Selma Burke Arts Center. And I thought, why am I going all the way over to East Liberty? And she said, because it's a place where you can be free. Now get out the door. I was probably 12, 13. My mother is Olabreeze Catherine Beckham. She was an opera singer. She was an artist, and she was a teacher. The thing that she treasured the most was having the ability to teach young people and old people, everyone, the music can lift your soul and it can make a difference in your life. From teaching children how to add and subtract, to being able to have that place where you can go and have peace on your heart. My mother was born in 1928, which was a crazy time. But by the time she was 12, she had this operatic voice, and everyone looked at her strangely. One of her first teachers was Madam Mary Caldwell Dawson, that everyone is aware of now because of the historic opera company in the building on Apple Street that's being resurrected. At the age of 16, my mother applied because she had a teacher who was, because that's my grandbaby, sorry. Because her teacher was a part of the press, and he thought that she should be applying and try out for the Pittsburgh Opera Company. So there she went to sing at 16 and was told after she finished that, next, nice to see you, young lady. But as she walked off stage, she overheard, "If only we could paint her white." She was 16. And from that moment on, she knew that she was going to start her path in this journey that's mostly white and as being an operatic soloist and star. She went to Wilberforce University, and at the time there was a competition to try out for the Metropolitan Opera Company. And who she competed against was Leontine Price. Well, she actually beat Leontine Price and had the opportunity to go. But at the same time, she was in love with my father, and he had re-enlisted to go to the service. And she said, "No, I won't do the opera. I'm going to make sure my husband is safe, and we'll go back home to Pittsburgh." And she began her career in Pittsburgh. She sang for the Sewickley Opera Company. She sang all in any area, because back in the day, a lot of the boroughs had their own opera companies. She began teaching music with her partner and friend, Peggy Pierce Freeman, and she brought all aspects of music to our young people. And then one day she was at Macedonia, where she was the director of music for them for over 30 years. She was talking with Mr. Henry, and he asked her to come to the Hill House. So she moved her music studio from the church in Macedonia, where she continued to be director of music, and began at the Hill House. And the years that she spent there, which was 35 years, she touched thousands of lives and made a difference. And at the same time, she continued to fight for the arts in the city of Pittsburgh, for the acknowledgement that Black people have every right to do it and to be a part of it. So she's had quite a few students that have gone on to become opera singers, and one even made it to the Metropolitan Opera Company. And that was all that she ever wanted to do, was to continue the fight that we have a right to be in an area where others said we had no right to be in. The work that she's done at the Hill House was probably one of the most cherished parts, because not only did she work with adults and children, but she had a special niche of children who were autistic, children who were retarded, children, or whatever the word is, excuse me, children who were different, to make them feel included and loved. And every week, as Justin may remember, every year, she made sure every child participated in a recital where their family could come out and hear them play their songs, or play their music, or sing their songs, or play the piano or organ. And she even brought in other teachers that could teach other instruments and dance. My mother was also the chairman of the National Association of Negro Musicians, and the local chairman on the historic process to get that opera house a historic building. She knew then that it was vital that it be around. Her and the seniors that worked with her friends that also took lessons, that also participated with Madam Mary Caldwell Dawson. This is the history that happened at that house, that they saw, that they lived through, that as children they would hear, the different musicians that came through, must be recognized. Because not only was it historical, but it was held in the Black community. It was a historical building located in Homewood. Now we see all now, because Black Lives Matter and all that thing happened during quarantine, and now they understand our importance. And so I feel good knowing that my mother had a lot to do with it. So I don't know. That's basically Ola Breeze Casson Beckham, a beautiful lyric soprano that loved to teach and loved people and loved music. That's it for me.
Thank you, Eugenie. And again, I got chills as I did with Dr. Burke, but I think this one hits home a little differently because I was a student of Ola Breeze Beckham. And one of my best friends posted a picture of the book, The Singing Road, the other day, which was the book that Ms. Beckham made all of us use.
Yes,
And
you did.
the first song is Caro Mio Ben. So that's the only,
Yes,
we all
it
learned it. We were 12 years old singing Italian arias, didn't even know what we was talking about.
Exactly.
She told us, but just to give a personal story, I used to, she taught me at Macedonia when I was growing up at the church, and we used to call her our own Leontine Price. But I also went to Centers for the Musically Talented when it was at Peabody, now Obama. And Ms. Beckham taught me private voice. Miss Freeman taught me piano. And then they made me get in the car with them because after Centers, they went to Hill House to teach more. So I used to ride with them to the Hill House. So we would stop at like Wendy's or Burger King or something, and they would feed me. And I would go have to take another lesson with them because they felt like the lesson at Centers wasn't long enough. And I would take another lesson with them. So I used to roll with them in the car. So
well, that's funny. I forgot. My mother and Miss Freeman were the first Black teachers at the Centers for Musically Talented for the Pittsburgh Public School System.
Yep, and I was one of their students, and I love them, and I miss those rides. So thank you so much for coming to share. It means a lot to have you here.
I'll just say too, I do remember those recitals 1,000%. And one of the things that I appreciate this context too about what she was doing there, because every child's name will be listed on that program as well.
Yeah.
So like you'd open up that program and you sit down and go, "All right, we're here." You know what I mean? It was like exactly. But it was I remember how much it meant to my daughter and how much it meant to us to see her up there, and how your mother stood right over her to make sure she got through that and was there to encourage her, let her do her thing. If she's slow, she was just right there. She was so welcome to me. I'm so appreciative of what you shared.
Well, thank you. My mom was pretty cool. She was a great lady.
Yes, she was. And she actually created this really cool space for artists because when I worked at Hill House, I had a chance to work with her as well. And she would do this yearly event where artists could set up and show their work. And they were professional artists. They were self-trained artists. But she made sure that there was a space for them to be there for the community to see and celebrate their work, as well as the yearly recitals.
And I have so many pictures from all those where people would give her a painting. Thank you, Miss Beckham.
That's awesome. Thank you. And I want to talk more, we'll talk more about Dr. Burke and Miss Ola Breeze Beckham in conversation in just a second. Mr. Redwood said, when things weren't quite right, she didn't say anything, but she would give us that look. And I'm familiar with that look. I'm familiar with that look as well, especially when I was in choir.
Yes, I inherited that look.
Yes, indeed. All right, next we are going to talk about Dr. Maisha Baton, which I was calling Baton for years until I met Miss Tracy. So thank you for correcting me. So today to talk about Dr. Baton is Dr. Baton's daughter, one and only child, Tracy Baton, LSW. Tracy grew up as Dr. Baton's only child and lived on Center Avenue near the old YMCA. She is a grandmother, community organizer, social worker, and psychotherapist. She is also the director of the Women's March on Washington, Pittsburgh, and co-director of Indivisible Pittsburgh. She grew up in Pittsburgh's Hill District and Squirrel Hill neighborhoods. She went to Hill District Catholic and later to Alderdice High School. Tracy obtained her undergraduate degree from the University of Pittsburgh Honors College and her MA in Medical Anthropology and African History from the University of Florida. Her Fulbright Fellowship sponsored research on women, health, and caregiving in rural South Africa and challenged the view of the work, health, and healing for rural women. She lived and did research in the Eastern Cape with her family for more than 2 years. She returned to Pittsburgh in 1996 and was a stay-at-home parent of 3 girls for more than a decade. In 2008, she went back to the University of Pittsburgh for her master's in social work, where she was a Hill House Fellow working with young adults, an Epperson Fund Scholar, and a social work intern at the Pittsburgh Veterans Hospital. She worked as a social worker in Homewood, McKeesport, and other areas of Pittsburgh for more than a decade. She now supports LGBTQ youth and their families throughout Western Pennsylvania. In addition, Tracy brought together and led the team that organized the Women's March on Washington, Pittsburgh in 2017. That event brought 25,000 marchers to downtown Pittsburgh, third only to Steeler and Penguin celebrations. Tracy also led the Women's March on Washington, Pittsburgh in the years 2018 through 2020, other actions in support of democracy, anti-racism, and the environment. She was the organizer of Earth Day 2020 and was part of the team that supported the march following the tragedy at Tree of Life. She has won 2 Best of Pittsburgh awards for her work. And I'll now turn it over to you, Tracy. Thank you.
I wanted to be organized enough to show you pictures while I was talking. I am not. We're going to talk, and then I'll show you a few pictures at the end. That was in my capacity. I also ask your patience, because as I started talking about what life was in the Hill District, I kept backing up to make things make sense. So for a minute, I need to talk a little bit about my mom's life before we got to the Hill District. She was born in 1939 in Harrisburg. While her mother, my grandfather had died, and my grandmother was really struggling financially, but nevertheless, my mom did amazingly in school. And one of the things I found in her thing was a newspaper clipping that is talking about a competition conducted by the Air Force and Kiwanis International about what was it like to live in the air age. And I think they meant the age of the airplane, right? The age of transportation, the air age. What are the responsibilities of citizenship in the air age? And my mom won, but interesting, they never mentioned that she was Black. They said she was an amazing girl and there's no picture. So I guess that made people more comfortable. Why it's interesting is what she won for saying is actually quoted in the paper. And I have that quote because she kept everything. And she said, "This nation can only be as good as its citizens. For in the United States, the citizens are the nation. We are the ones that enjoy freedom and must take on its responsibilities. These responsibilities are important for the safety of our family, community, and the country in this age." I think that's interesting because the themes of civic responsibility and engagement continue throughout her life. And I had not read this quote until very recently. So I've often been asked why I do the crazy things that I do. And now I'm more clear about that. It continues. So Harrisburg only had 2 high schools, a Black high school and a white high school. Uncle Michael, my uncle, who said they sent my mom to the white high school because she simply was the smartest kid in the class. And as far as I know, she was one of 2 students in Harrisburg's white high school where she got an education in classics, Latin and French. She could always read the things on buildings and then like translate my response into Latin. And I never stopped marveling as a child that my mom knew Latin. By the time she could graduate, she typed 200 words a minute and worked later in New York at Macy's in the window as a typewriter with a manual typewriter that people can't even imagine today compared to a computer. My uncle said she was always reading and writing as a kid. But throughout her life, her academic achievements are extraordinary, but they have to be seen in the context of the family that we're from. My mother was a descendant of Sally Barber, who started a school in the 1800s to teach Black people to read. All of her siblings went to school. There was a school went to college and got a degree beyond a bachelor's. She had my aunt had a school named after her. Her sister had a school named after her in Harrisburg. One of her close cousins that I call uncle, one of my uncles, I don't care about people, was Doctor of the Year for the United States. So they grew up together. Whatever that meant, the family support had to be extraordinary. I asked my mom why we were that way, and she said it was because my grandmom read the paper every day. I don't know. She left Harrisburg for New York for nursing school, but nursing school couldn't hold her creativity. While she lived there, she did graduate, but she moved into a commune that my grandmother did not approve of, where she met with intellectuals, went to poetry readings. I know she met Jack Kerouac and Miles Davis. She has a copy of Frantz Fanon from those ages and could discuss Fanon, a political theorist that whose theories really underlie almost all of our liberatory thought. Like if you study the politics of liberation, political science of liberation, and then you read Fanon from the 40s and 50s, you know where so many of those ideas came from. In New York, she also met a man that she only knew briefly that got her pregnant. So that was the entire contribution that man made to my life. And she went back to Harrisburg to have the baby me. While in Harrisburg, we lived in the projects and she worked for the Human Relations Commission. I remember being little and oh so proud of her fighting for housing. Housing is what I thought they did. I learned later they did other things, but I clearly thought that work was important. But when my uncle, Michael Disman, founded Bidwell here in Pittsburgh, she came to Pittsburgh to help him. And we briefly lived on the north side until he left Pittsburgh, but she decided to make her home there. We bounced around to like this weird place, Craft Avenue in Oakland, and then top of a hill at Fairmont and Kincaid, but finally settled on Center Avenue in the Hill District, the place I think of as my real childhood home. When she moved, that's when she dropped her dead name. I'm sure you all know my mother was not named Maisha when she was born in 1939. They named little black girls Maisha. That's when she said she needed a free name, and she shed her dead name and took Maisha, which was abundant life, as her name as she started Pitt. And I remember that first year she started Pitt and she was taking Swahili and she took her African name, and I changed my name as well. I think Carl Redwood is the only person here that remembers that I'm Rahashishi as well as Tracy. From the time we moved into the Hill District, my mom was really involved in the community. When we first moved, I went to Falk, which Fannie Adele Falk is Pitt's extremely expensive private school. I had scholarship. And I remember her creating an African heritage classroom or like an African display at Falk. And then I remember a different day, the parents came and we had to tell them about that. So I have a memory of explaining to Mr. Rogers, whose child was in my classroom, why Africa mattered to me, thanks to my mom. She also sent me to African Free School that Salah Uddin ran. She said that it was Salah Uddin who encouraged her to go to Pitt. Even though she was crossing that mountain every day, she stayed connected to people in the neighborhood. We knew the jitney drivers by name. I would actually go to the jitney station and hide and read when I was told to go outside and play. We knew the people at the Center Avenue Y, the corner store, and my mom talked to everybody the same, like different than other people who, even her aunt was, my aunt was a little shadiddy. If my mom talked to everybody, the janitor, the president, she didn't care. She didn't think of you any differently. We attended a lot of churches in the community, and although by the end of her life, my mom would describe herself as Buddhist, and she never was a committed church person in that way. She said she would explain to me the liberatory power of church in our community and that there was great music. So I can remember her taking me to churches and she would pick churches based on the singing. And that's about when she moved me and I went to Hill District Catholic, which was later called St. Benedict the Moor, because she wanted me to be a Black school in the community. She also, in that school, Hill District Catholic, St. Richard's is what it was called at one point too. She would involve people from Pitt to come over and talk. So I can remember Rob Penny, a poet and playwright in the school. I have vivid memories of Dr. Vernil Lilly, who was a poet and playwright, a director and teacher at Pitt, teaching Casey at the Bat in my classroom because my mom brought her there. She also thought it was important to get involved in the community. So I learned weaving and African dance at Selma Burke. And she encouraged me to play so I can remember. But Jeannie's mom, Mrs. Beckham, got me out of music because I hated the cello. My uncle played with Sun Ra, and I wanted to play the clarinet and be cool like him, but the nun said I had to play the cello. And when I explained that at the Hill House, she said I don't have to play anymore. I was so happy. My mom fit in a way that might have seemed difficult at the surface. She was always different than other women of her time. She rarely dressed in a way that people expected. She refused to straighten her hair when everyone straightened their hair. She didn't wear a dress. Even during the years I wasn't allowed to wear pants to school. She didn't wear makeup, a wig, or ladies' clothing. She was largely gender non-conforming in a world that wanted a lot of conformity. When my mother later in her life, she looked like everybody else, but when I was a kid, she looked like nobody's mom. But when people would ask me why, I shrugged because I got to have my mom and they had to just have their moms. Although we were quickly out of town, she came from out of town. She made friends with artists and creative people from around Pittsburgh. In our home, we had people from the Pitt Jazz Ensemble, the university, artists, political organizers, and she also made friends with African students at Pitt who came to get their papers typed and hang out. I know my friends in the neighborhood whispered about the Africans as African consciousness was in the air, but no one knew anybody from Africa. So it was just a powerful vision of people mixing and knowing each other. Some examples, she was close friends with Bob Johnson of the Pittsburgh Black Theater Dance Ensemble, which was an important dance and theater troupe at the time. They even made her an honorary member. I can remember her and Bob writing proposals as she would furiously type, and Bob would tell her things for the dance ensemble, and them discussing themes around African fruits from American roots. No, American fruits from African roots. She stated in one of her writings that she met August Wilson at a local community center in the Hill District. I don't know which one. She said he was dressed in Goodwill clothing, and she wrote that her first impression was that he was a mad writer. I can remember him scribbling in our house and smoking so furiously that the ashes and the pen were joined on the piece of paper in front of him. She and him were famous for writing and talking together in restaurants around Pittsburgh and the Hill District, furiously scribbling and arguing over the details of poetry. At the University of Pittsburgh, she connected with Rob Penny, another poet and playwright who later went on to be the head of the Black Studies Department, and they founded the Country Writers Workshop with August. It was a center of gravity for creative people throughout the region for many years. In an article, she stated that when she met August in the Hill, his language was always kind of formal, and she thought he was just another character. As they became closer in the Country Writers Workshop, August began writing plays. She states that his first play, Recycling, was about two people, a man and a woman. And at that time, his language was rather formal, as his education had largely been based around classics that he had taught himself in libraries. My mom at the time was deeply invested in Black poets. For example, if I misbehaved, I had to memorize Langston Hughes or Gwendolyn Brooks. That first play, Recycling, was performed at a Projects Community Center. I think it was in Northview Heights. And I banged my head to get that out, but I'm not positive. But I remember that long summer of them debating the play and lines from the play. And as that play is written, the voice that we later know as August Wilson emerges out of that play. In 1977, they worked together on a project called Black Bart in the Sacred Hills, along with Claude Purdy, one of his most important directors. That project, I've talked to different people involved, it said it was really wild. I have it written, but I don't remember seeing it performed. I was a teenager in a bad attitude by 1977. And August said that play wasn't really part of his playwriting career, but she wrote the lyrics to some of the poems. I don't know. I think that's an interesting question for the future. She also, with her friend John Rusty Williams and the Northside Youth Ensemble, worked with presenting poetry mixed with gospel music. They performed a show called How Can We Sing the Lord's Song in a Strange Land in a local church. And she read, "How will I sing in the ashes and rubble of my historic presence, troubled by old loves and new tears falling from ancient eyes and whole days, dismembered by capitalism, seeing sisters and brothers take from each other what no one has given them, while young girls shake that thing, shake that thing." Importantly, as much as today we'll remember her as an artist, throughout that time, she started Pitt. She got an undergraduate degree, summa cum laude, a master's in phenomenological psychology from Duquesne, and a PhD in psychology, no, in counseling from the University of Pittsburgh in 6 years. I mean, from start to finish, all those degrees in 6 years. Throughout that time, she taught Black child development with Lloyd Bell at the University of Pittsburgh, a course they developed together that emphasized the racism in educational systems and the ways in which educational systems fundamentally disadvantage Black kids. That course continued for enough years that as an undergraduate, I gave a couple guest lectures, so a long time. Thinking about my mom's life and our home, I was in graduate school many years later, having to teach the French Revolution, and I encountered the idea of a salon. And a salon is seen to be in European history, a gathering of people held by an inspiring host to amuse each other, increase their knowledge, and connect the arts with political and philosophical movements. In that moment, I realized I grew up in a salon. Our home was very much that place where there was a crossroads between artists and creative people and jazz and politics, and anything could happen, and the future seemed like something that was unfolding before you there. That liberation was in the air, but it was going to come from all of these really exciting directions. My mom left Pittsburgh to write when I graduated from high school. And briefly, she went to Albuquerque, where she immediately became interested in where is the Black community and sought out Blackdom in the Southwest. And she wrote about exodusters. She gathered the 1984 Symposium of Black History in the Southwest and wrote plays about Blackness in the Four Corners region. And she wrote a chapter for the high school that for many years was used as the high school textbook on African Americans in the Southwest. And I'll show you these pictures briefly because I feel like I went too long. Can I share a screen, Kendra? Am I?
Yes, you may. You should be able to. And we got plenty of time, so no worries.
Okay. See, Terry just says she's nervous. I talk fast. That's worse.
No, you were fine.
Okay, I'm sharing my screen, really. If someone was typing to me during the time I was talking, they are gonna have to tell me later because I have no idea. I see my name over there. Don't know. Okay, share screen.
It's coming up now.
But this isn't. Why are you being bad? When I edit the album, stop being edit album. Let's see if we could get this to behave. Okay. I'm so sorry. Okay. This is my mom at high school graduation. It's the only picture I have of that person she left behind. It's colorized too, because all of them were, I was told. This is me and her in the Hill District. This photograph is by Omadi Hightower, who is a well-known Pittsburgh photographer who also did an extraordinary series of nudes of her that should be in a museum somewhere. Just gorgeous, spectacular photography. This is my mother, August Wilson, Rob Penny. And I'm not, I mean, I think I know the other two guys, but I'm not certain. And I think we had those spoons. That could be our house, but that could be everybody's house in 1970. Like everybody had them spoons. So I'm not positive. If you didn't have them spoons, I don't know where you grew up. My mom in August. That's her. I think she's like 55 in this picture. There's us when she was little. And you can see I'm young enough that this is 1973 or 4. And she has short hair and African jewelry and did not care. Short hair, don't care. And this is when people would come up to you and act like you had lost your mind. It's hard to even explain. And that there's my mom. That's from her book jacket. So that's what she wants you to think about how she looks, because she picked that picture for her book jacket. So that is what she wants. So I have many more pictures, but I didn't get through them. But I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful. Like I think Celeste said in the chat, like just all these women and just have us so full. It's just like making these connections and hearing that, like, you know, you also were taught by Miss Beckham and you went to Dr. Burke's school and Eugenie went to Dr. Burke's school, and just seeing this lineage, and it's just, I'm a little overwhelmed. And so we will definitely make space for questions. We have plenty of time and I'm grateful for that. Thank you so much, Tracy. And you're a great storyteller too. I'm sure you know that, but like, I really love the way you tell stories. And thank you for sharing those pictures, because has anybody in the world seen those pictures? Like, I've never seen those before.
No, they're from a raggedy box in the other room. I scanned them with my little scanner here.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. That was beautiful. So we are going to open up the floor for questions in just a second. Before we do that, we have, you know, just a question to kind of spark a conversation that hopefully, you know, each of our panelists will kind of engage in together. But Justin is going to kick us off with a kind of like a probing question. But if you already know the question that you might have for one or more of our panelists, you can feel free to drop it in the chat, or when we open it up in a minute, you can say it out loud, whatever you prefer. But go ahead, Justin, I'm going to give it to you right now.
Yeah. So again, thanks everyone. Thanks, Tracy, for all that you just shared there. You know, this came up, I think we had our kind of pre-talk, and just wondered if you each might speak to the way that you feel like each one of these women, particularly the one that you were speaking about though, but how do you feel like they saw their work, their art, their lives, and this idea like Black freedom, and if there's any connection to the Hill, but the unique way that they saw it? I don't imagine that, I thought was interesting was I was in a conversation yesterday and marriage came up, and someone said that that in many of those communities, or at least in one that they knew of, there was an agreement with some of the people who are holding Africans enslaved around like making sure that like you can have this space, but there's certain things that you can't do, and there was some coexistence going on as well. And I say that to say that it's not like a neat freedom, you know, and just wondering how each person that you spoke about, how did they see Black freedom in their work and their art? What's your sense, if they were to speak, what is your sense of how they saw that idea? And anything else that you could say in that area would be great. And maybe I add one thing to it, because you all spoke in some ways about collectivity. So not just like as an individual, but what did they think of like as like a Black collective freedom? What do you think that they saw in that? And in no like crazy fancy terms, just like what's your sense of where they held that?
Terry, do you want to tackle that one first?
I think Dr. Burke saw it as creating space for others, that what she wanted to do was not just reflect her work, but she wanted to make sure that there were opportunities for people in the community to show their work. And also equally important was for other artists of color to be able to have a place to show their work. Because when she started, there weren't that many places where African-American artists could be shown. And I think in many ways, the Selma Burke Art Center was almost a push against kind of the museum system, you know, where you had your art had to look a certain way, you had to present a certain way, and you didn't have to do any of that to be a part of the Selma Burke Art Center. So I think she really thought about this notion of inclusivity. I like what you said about the collectiveness of the space that she created, but I think she looked at the spaces that left her and her contemporaries out and deliberately sought out ways to create spaces that didn't exist for her, to make sure that the next generations of artists felt honored and appreciated, and that their work was valued enough that there was space for it.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
I think my mom's work, Dr. Baton's work, involved lots of kinds of liberation, but I think the one that was key and most important to her was liberating Black voices, to create, to support people in offering the voice that was true to our community. If you look at writing before this period, Black writing, the voice is not the same voice that you hear in our homes. After this period, she was part of a movement of poets and writers and authors that freed our voices to tell our truth in our own voices, not in a transformed and Europeanized voice. And I think for her that was really key to her liberation. She talked about finding her own voice. She talked about Country Writers Workshop as a place you could find your own voice. And I think that was the liberation that was central to her work, but not the only one.
That's great. Thanks so much. Ms. Beckham?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Mhm.
Okay. When I think about that question in regards to my mother, it was always different with her because her religion and her faith made her feel that she had a right to be anywhere. And so here was a Black opera singer at a time when you could count them on one hand. And not only was she willing to bring opera to everyone, she felt it was important to bring opera and our music to the Black community. So you hear people saying when they were 12 years old, they were learning a language to sing in. She also emphasized all of the spirituals. They were extremely important to her, that everyone understood that there was double meaning behind most of them. She was an educator in the fact that she would look a child in the face and say, there's nothing that you cannot do. Nothing. And you can't allow anyone to stop you from doing that, including singing opera if you want to sing opera. So I think her whole essence was about knowing who you were and who you are as an individual, your relationship to your people, because I don't know if everyone knows this, but my mother and we are direct descendants of Frederick Douglass. He was my grandfather's second cousin. Well, throughout my life, that's all I knew about, is that we always have rights, and we have the right to stand on anything that God has put in us and to be able to project that out to anyone. So I was raised that way. So injustices were something that were not accepted. My parents put me in an all-white school in 1960, and it was in Grandview Elementary School. in a highly racist area that I walked to every day. But there she was. If I had any problems, to ask the teacher, why, what's the problem? Why isn't she getting this award? Or why wasn't she? Because I was a straight A student. As long as you could do the work, you should be getting the credit for it. As long as you had the ability, you should be able to do it. So her whole essence was about that right. From the moment when those judges told her, if only we could paint her white. She thought, what you're missing is how strong and how vibrant this Black voice is.
That's right.
And
Thank
she
you.
continued this throughout her life.
That's right. Thank all of you. Yeah.
Thank you. Justin, were you gonna say something else?
No, I just appreciate that. And I feel like that's just, yeah, thank you.
No, I really appreciate that as well. And before, I do want to make more space for like conversation. If there's questions that each of you as panelists want to ask each other, or something that as you pointed out some kind of connections there with the different ways that you had relationships to, whether in person or just through the work of these women. But before we get there, I want to just ask one question. I know, Terry, even though you didn't know Dr. Burke, finding out about Dr. Burke has in some ways changed the course of your life. And I want to give you an opportunity to talk a bit more about that. But for Ms. Tracy and Ms. Eugenie, I want to talk about, you talked about your mothers and how much you love your mothers. And how, like Tracy, you mentioned how like you started to understand a little bit more about why you are the way you are because of your mother. But could you all, and specifically you, Ms. Tracy and Ms. Eugenie, talk a little bit about how the ways your mothers explored Black liberation through their work and the way they lived their lives has impacted you, and the way you lived your life, the way you've done whatever work you've done. Is there any particular instance where it became like you became more aware of it? How has it shown up for you, both positively, negatively, or otherwise? But just like to hear more about how their work and Black liberation has shaped who you are and what you've done.
Well, I'll go first, Tracy. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I was always a rebel. I was a rebel. I was taught that as long as I had the knowledge of what I was speaking, that I should speak. So that meant at the dinner table, I challenged my father. That meant in school, I challenged teachers. That meant when a cop pulled me over, I challenged the cop. I wasn't raised in fear. So in 92, when Mania Bay was killed by the police, my mother, we had a relationship with the Bays because we both were teaching their children piano lessons. So they reached out to me because at the same time I was like president of the local Beltsville Neighborhood Council. And she said, I said, what do you want to do? And they said, we need someone that's willing to take this fight on. And I didn't hesitate. Now, this is in the time when the so-called gangs were all crazy and police were insane. And my mother looked at me and said, okay, you're stepping out on this. I'll support you 100%. And part of my support is to pray for your safety, because this is an uncharted land in Pittsburgh because you're challenging the police. And I looked at her and I was just like, Black Power, let's go. I hadn't even thought of that, and I had children at the time. But I began to realize that I had to still step out on that faith that she gave me to make this move against what they did to this young man. And knowing that I had the support of my mother, who told everybody to go to the march, make sure you participate and go to the inquest, who was always there saying, keep going, babe, don't stop, keep going. It was an example of how my life was. And as an example of how many other lives she touched also that knew Miss Beckham was always fair and Miss Beckham would fight for you. If she had to go to the school to fight with a music teacher that said you couldn't do something, she would go. So I guess when you're raised in that type of environment, even with a father that was a Q that thought he was white, my dad was tough. She would tell him she has to stand on what she knows. And she has to be able to speak freely and not be afraid. So, I mean, anybody that knows me knows that I'm that girl. I'll speak freely on what I know, and I'm not afraid. And I thank her for that because she instilled that in me because I watched her every day do things that the normal person would run from. It was a challenge for her. And it was also important for her to uplift our community and for our communities to have a venue where they can uplift themselves. That's what I think about that.
Thank you.
And I'm answering, how was I influenced by being my mother's child? Is that the answer to the question?
Yeah, how do you think it shaped,
That's
you know,
like
how
a whole year in therapy or something, girl. I did that year back in like the tens.
that's real.
Somebody to have that whole conversation for a whole year, but we can review. I don't care now. My mother was absolutely a towering figure. She was so smart that she made being smart look easy. She made solving other people's problems look easy. She ran Dr. Bell's class while she raised me and got degrees. And I mean, it's the simultaneity of the things that I was talking about she was doing in the Hill District. It's easy to think that that's her whole life. That was the like 6-7 years we lived in the Hill District. She was crushing everything she touched. And no one who met her did not think she was maybe the smartest person they'd ever met. Like, and she wouldn't even try. My mom was a much more quiet, modest, self-effacing person than I am. And people would drag her out of the corner because they knew, they were like, Maisha knows, go find Maisha. She's not talking to anybody, but if you go get her, she's the one that knows. And so for me, I mean, there's the civic engagement responsibility part. I was her talker. That's why I'm the talker. Because she'd be like, go tell somebody this, go do this. I read her poetry as a kid. So I'm good at it. How did she influence me? How did she not influence me? She really educated me. I went to 13 schools in 12 years. So, you know, I didn't really learn anything there. But I nevertheless am a highly educated person because I learned it at home. She didn't not just influence me. Everyone who met my mother walked away having learned something different about themselves or their world.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And her daughter's really smart too.
That's abundantly clear.
Oh, stop, Jeannie. Jeannie just like me. Before you were all
really,
here, we
really,
decided to be the
really
head
smart.
of each other's fan club. That's all.
It's respect and love. Nothing but respect and love.
So with that, I want to make space for if there is a comment, a question, you know, anything people want to share. We have got plenty of time to make this a community conversation. And so I don't even really feel a need to like do too much moderation. Mr. Redwood has his hand up. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, Terry, you wanted to say something first?
Just to answer the question.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
That's okay. What's really been interesting to me is how wonderful it's been to listen to both Jeannie and Tracy talk about their moms. And so I wanted to talk for a minute about my mom.
Please, I'm going on mute.
That's right. Bring it on in, Terry.
So when I was a kid, I grew up in East Liberty. We lived a 6-minute walk from the Selma Burke Art Center. And my mom's plea to me was just go look around, maybe try dance, maybe you want to paint. And I remember just digging my heels in, like, ain't nobody want to dance. I can't dance. I want to play football. And so we went round and round about should I dance? Should I play football? And my mom gave me the freedom to make a choice. Unfortunately, I chose football. But my mom knew better, because who would have known that decades later, Selma Burke would come back into my life in a way that was just unfathomable. And so I want to thank my mom for giving me space to say no, because maybe she knew something I didn't get. Because Selma Burke entered my life, as I said earlier, happenstance, or maybe it was a blessing. But when they were redoing Kaufman and they took down her statue together, they wheeled it into my office. And from that moment, my life was changed. It was like every day I would open that door and there they were. And I got a chance on really good days to just stroke the statue, and on really bad days, shut my door and talk to it. Who knew? And I had no idea that this was a seminal piece of American art. And just wanting to understand more about that artwork literally set me on the path that I'm following today. And that is researching about this piece, learning more about Dr. Burke, and also seeking from the community an understanding of her work and her life and how she's influenced people. At one point, we actually had this event at Hill House where we bought the statue over to Kaufman, and people were allowed to touch it. So the curator I was working with was having multiple heart attacks because I was letting people touch this piece of artwork without gloves. Because I was like, we're trying to raise money to conserve it. You may never be able to get this close to an important piece of American art, so go ahead. And that night, people from around Pittsburgh were super generous. I mean, people came with pictures, people told stories, people, kept up with me and ended up bringing like discs with interviews. And those things really made me think about how I wanted to live the rest of my life. And I want to live my life in pursuit of the story of a woman whose name should be repeated and repeated, just like Dr. Baton, just like Mrs. Beckham. And so I literally am walking away from a comfortable space. And this is unusual for me because I'm the woman that always tell people, don't quit your job till you got something to quit to. But I literally am taking this leap of faith that there is going to be an opportunity for me to be able to tell these stories and survive. And I think that sense of trusting myself to follow this whim came from my mom, who was an incredibly quiet woman, but she was a strong woman. My mom was 4'11", and she was like E.F. Hutton. When Jeannie spoke, people listened. And my mom gave me that gift of being quiet and listening, and being able, when that truth hit my heart and hit my gut, to follow it. So Dr. Burke gave me the impetus for this search, but I am genuinely grateful that my mom gave me the freedom to trust myself enough to know that this is important work and that I should do it.
So thank you. Because when Terry first told me about, so first of all, I should say that the inspiration behind even doing this program is that a while ago when I was working on my dissertation, Terry Baltimore told me about Dr. Burke's relationship to the Hill District. I did not know anything about it. I knew who Dr. Burke was, but I didn't know about that. And she told me about a woman named Dr. Maisha Baton, whose name I'd seen and the significance I did not understand until I spoke to Terry Baltimore. And when I told her I wanted to do a program, I knew that you existed, Tracy, but I didn't know who you were. So I wasn't brave enough to reach out to you. So I said, Terry, I want to do something. And she said, well, you should talk to her daughter. And I knew that Ola Breeze Beckham had an impact on my life. And Tracy said, well, I'm going to put you in contact with her daughter. So these Black women that are on this call really put this program together organically. But I wanted to just say this because Terry, the way she was just talking right now, almost having me crying, was how she was talking to me. We were talking about these things, the passion she had for these women. And I started to dig deeper in all these different directions, and I learned more about Dr. Baton's life. And I found a little piece of a poem she was speaking in New Mexico, I think. And it became the part of the poem became my mantra. And I told Tracy on the last call, it was, no one has asked me to sing, but sing I do anyhow. And it's become kind of like, I believe, very much emblematic of how I live my life. And so I really feel blessed to be here. I wanted to say that in case we get off the Zoom and we forget to get back to this. But thank you, Terry, for that. Thank you for helping me kind of like frame this whole thing and bringing this together. And thank you for sharing that and bringing that full circle with your mother. That's beautiful. And with that, before we open it up, I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Redwood because he had his hand up first. And then from there, folks, if you have a comment, a question, come on, let's go. Community conversation.
I just wanted to note that one picture you showed, Tracy, was the Center Avenue Poets. And that would be Maisha, August Wilson, Rob Penny, Charlie Williams, and Nick Flournoy.
I knew it was Charlie. I wasn't sure about
however,
Nick.
when the story is told of the Center Avenue Poets, they don't mention your mother. They always talk about Charlie and Nick and August and Rob, but they don't mention Maisha, who was right there the whole time and who went on to help Country Writers Workshop form as the after thing to Center Avenue Poets. But I think that's really important to note that I mean, she was in the mix in all of that, and the recognition is not there.
It's worse than that, really, Carl. I'm here being nice, but there are a number of prominent places where she's written about as August's paramour. And I will tell you something, my mom was not secret that she had an active adult life. It did not include him. And the idea that a man and a woman couldn't write poetry together, she didn't cook for him, and she was not his paramour. And the idea that people want to say either, my mom didn't cook for nobody, not even me. She will write you a poem about food, but you were not getting food. The lady next door cooked for me the most as a kid. I always knew whose mom had food. But people want to write about her as if she was either some glorified housekeeper or sleeping with him. You want to see me mad? That makes me mad.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, not because the question is, was she sexually active? She didn't have to be pure, but that wasn't what she was doing. So anyway, thank you for bringing that up. And there, now you all know where my secret place make me mad is. But I really...
Hi, Carl Redwood.
I love Carl's comment, and I'm wondering, I know Carl and Celeste, I don't know the other folks here. I have a poem by my mom about those years in the 70s in the Hill District that you might want to hear. Like, I'm willing to read if you want me to read it. Well, Carl does, so the rest of y'all, I'll see how I don't really care. It's called African Footprints. It was Pittsburgh in the 70s, and the world was a Black happening. There was Black Bart and Diane's Heart, an ode to Ethiopia done by us women. It was sweet back in the summer city of bubbling brown sugar and chocolate pudding, of all of it happening in ebony. It was Black expressions of truth from almost everyone. It was Little Willie by Rob Penny and Black Bart by August Wilson and Color Girls by some very colored ladies. With jazz riding, once again, the airwaves of the city coming at you. and Diz wasn't really gone, and wine cellars were still selling their thing, and Sweetback singing his badass song, and BJ giving bitches their due. Sure enough, dancing, sure enough, happening of American fruits from African roots with titles of destruction. It was Bearden and White at the Black Arts Center, and Haitian artifacts on Solidarity Day. It was Amir doing his poet thing, just blowing in the word. It was days full of Black love and who loves a dancer anyway. It was the 9th circle on the endless wheel with you and me dreaming a Kuntu dream, because love goes on turning and nights keep on burning, and African footprints will never vanish from this earth.
Mm. I like that.
I do too.
To me, it
Oh,
very
okay.
much captures those years, like of the Hill District years. That's the poem about the Hill District years for sure.
Mm-hmm.
If I could, I would like paint out on Center Avenue, African footprints will never vanish from this earth in big letters every time I get mad and I go up there and I see every one of my childhood friends' homes torn down.
Yeah.
Anybody else have a question or a comment? So, Terry, you having a problem trying to get that thing off your screen?
Yeah, I tried to hit a heart and it hit no. Thank you, Tracy. That was amazing. And that was part of the conversation that I had with Kendra. And that was finding out about your mom from you, reading some of her work, and thinking about how this amazing woman was excluded from the conversation. And that all the times people talked about Writers in the Hill, your mom's name wasn't part of it. And thank you for reading that and changing the narrative.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
It's Celeste. I just wanted to be vulnerable because I think in these times, if we can't at least do that and share our soul in a way that will bring about more healing and power, that many of the things that we have fought for, like, why even do it? Like, we know that our hearts and our minds and our souls are in the place where we've always wanted to make things better. And I am so, I am so grateful to have known all the women that have spoken today and their parents and their heroines, in a way that it's not so simple as you read about people, you meet them, and they have an impact on your life. But there's a vulnerability, there's an acceptance, there's a pride, there's an uplift, and there's a sense of commitment to continuing. And I felt like I try to do this experiment in Homewood. I think like Homewood, the Hill, and East Liberty has this like magical thing. We'll throw in Northside too. So what we're doing tonight is it's such a beautiful thing. And I established the Monticello Hospitality House later in life because I felt like I could do something that would connect to what we're calling marooning. Where there's a cooperative, where there's a sense of wanting to be connected to the
Mhm.
community, your family, in a way that may be hard, given what's going on in the world, but we all do it. And what absolutely beautiful examples we've experienced tonight, that we all do it in our own way. And I'm filled with so much love, and I needed it. And thank you so very much.
Hi, Celeste.
Hi, Jeannie.
Love you, Celeste.
Love you more.
What's wrong? Are we still here?
We are. We are. Let's just,
I think we're just marinating in that.
yes. Thank you, Ms. Denise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking of liberatory things, I have never publicly said out loud that my uncle is the founder of Bidwell. Like, there are
Yes, you
quarters in
just
which
did.
that's hot. I was not supposed to say that. I was taught as a child not to say that because there was some legal mess with white people when he left that I never completely understood. He's still alive. He lives in Clark County. He's on the Clark County Board of Supervisors and shit. But anyway, he could tell you. But I remember sitting in court over some mess, having to get dressed up and be the cute child, sitting there and behave and make my little cousin behave. And then he left town suddenly. So for us, like, when we came to Pittsburgh, he had a pool in Monroeville. He was living large. Like, I was amazed. He told me he owned Three River Stadium, and I believed him. He did. My Uncle Michael was a trip because he knew somebody. He took me out on the field. We walked around. So I was like, clearly, if you can walk around the stadium, it's yours. I thought it was mine. And so, so when we came to Pittsburgh, he had founded Bidwell, and then he left. And then other people took over and whatever. But the programs there he created and founded, I've never said that out loud. So somebody be coming for me tomorrow, but I don't care. I'm telling the truth today.
All right now. Nobody will come for you.
I mean, but that's a
all
Pittsburgh
know.
Black truth that two great Black men made Bidwell happen.
Right.
I think there are other Black women, though, whose stories just desperately need to be told. Of course, people can think of some of them, but I oftentimes think of my godmother, who is incredibly shy and will not be dragged out of hiding, Azizi Powell, who had a television show telling stories, African stories to Black kids. I had to go be on TV and like listen. I'm good at looking like I'm listening. Every week for a few years, like the Azizi show, if you're our age. But when I tell younger people, they don't even think something like that happened that long ago.
Right.
Yeah,
my mother was on QED. She had a series that she did for WQED for years, and this was like in the 60s and 70s.
Is it recorded, Jeannie, or did it go direct to pushed out?
I asked Chris Moore to find it. He could never find it, so I don't think so.
Yeah, WPXI said that Azizi's show was never recorded. It went directly to air and there's no recordings.
Right, yeah. But I remember she used to be on singing through the flower at Phipps Conservatory. And there she'd be walking through singing.
Wow.
Wow.
I'd be like, what's mommy doing on TV? Singing, my dad say singing, spirituals.
I was gonna say about those tapes though. I mean, I know they said it, they just did it straight live and they didn't record it, but just like Questlove found out that somebody somehow had a whole concert series in somebody's basement years later. I bet you
Yeah.
if somebody was able to access a tape room somewhere, that something somewhere
Yeah.
might be there. So we might have to push a little harder.
All right now.
Yeah. That got me thinking. I just want to say also that, like, as much as this has filled me up with so much peace and joy, considering, all that we're confronted with, and we forget that, like, when we say we stand on the shoulders of giants, I mean, my goodness, right? And
Yeah.
I feel so blessed, but I'm also a little angry that if it weren't for me having access and opportunity to have a conversation with Terry, that some of this stuff I would have never, I may have never found out. And so I'd like to use that anger a little bit as fuel to make sure that it doesn't stop at my generation, and that what are some other ways that we can help amplify these stories and these voices, but also, to your point, Ms. Tracy, other Black women who we don't know about and other generations behind us don't know about. And people think about, first of all, they erase Black women, like to Mr. Redwood's point, they don't bring up Dr. Baton in the Center Avenue Poets, but like how they erase whole legacies of Black communities, and they only want to, like, spotlight one or two to make it seem like it's an exception, when honestly,
Right.
Black culture and Black excellence and Black intelligence is plentiful and abundance, and it always has been. And I think that's what more important is, not to say we had a couple of more, but no, but like this is who we are, and that our Black brilliance is actually in abundance, and there's legacies of it, and we can tie it to what's in the present. I mean, I just think that's amazing, and I think it's important that we find ways to frame it in a way to make it available to this next generation. I don't know. I'm not the person that says the best way to do that, but I just wanted to say that I'm incredibly humbled by this, and I also see, in some strange way, myself in all of these women as a legacy of them, and I don't know how, and I feel a responsibility to these women. And Mr. Redwood makes a great point. I don't know if it's already happening, but maybe to help create an archive starting with this. I love that, and maybe it's a digital archive, because my question is always where. Like, so for instance, I know that, Pitt was on here earlier, the library, because they're working on something for August Wilson. And I know Dr. Baton, I think is some of her stuff involved with that, Tracy?
It's here at my house. They would like it to be, but I'm not ready to release her stuff to Pitt. I mean, that's not where we are right now. But I'm actually a historian, so I'm doing some writing, and I hope Terry, we can connect around grant writing. I didn't go to school for social work for nothing.
She's good at it
we need
too.
to get you some money. The Pittsburgh Foundation should be paying your bills. They need something to do. So, Carl's going to get you some money from the Pittsburgh Foundation. We'll just do that today. Carl, would you connect with Terry and get her grant? Well, I call Wasi. We'll get that. I think the other thing, though, Kendra, we were talking about liberation, and in terms of my mom, there's there's many kinds of liberation, and there's something today, we like this intersectionality word, but it's awkward and doesn't always fit. But she was having conversations about what liberation meant for women in the context of Black liberation long before people were parrying around this particular word. And she connected in different ways. So it's interesting that as someone who would sometimes actively say she was a feminist, she connected with women's liberation in a different way than white women would. Like, I know she worked intensely with PAR because she felt like Black women's bodies need to be safe. So she was trained with PAR and I think maybe she was on their board or something like that. But I have memories of those ladies from PAR and have her having conversations about that in the context of what it meant to be liberated as Black women and have our bodies be safe. This is a very contemporary, this is a last week conversation, not a 1972 conversation, but she was very much there. And she would talk about income inequity and things that really matter, grounded issues that matter first to us as Black women. Home ownership. I come from a family of Black homeowners. And she would talk explicitly about what it meant in Pittsburgh and how difficult it was to be anything but a renter forever. So,
Mhm.
you know, there are many kinds of liberation, but I will offer that that was very much part of her liberatory vision for me as a little Black girl and for Black women in general, was that economic empowerment. Man, she never was stopped. She got by every damn bean pie in the whole city of Pittsburgh, and every bean pie required a conversation about why economic empowerment. And she would give them away. She didn't eat. I mean, my mom was a little bitty person that didn't really care about food. So she'd buy bean pies and give them away. And then give conversations about, you know, economic empowerment, why it mattered. I was at Junior Achievement. I sold matches, you know, because her and yeah. And so like that,
Well-
going to Junior Achievement and making custom matches and selling it didn't connect for other people to what liberation meant. But what it meant to me from a family of small business owners and her as like about, it was my bean pies. And so everybody had to buy custom matches. You gotta be old to remember custom matches from me, you know?
I was just thinking about what's going on now on Apple Street, and knowing, and something that we need to do more today. It was like, my mother was a member of Mary Caldwell Dawson's opera company, and she sang in Aida. She did all that stuff. But in 1994, her and the National Association of Negro Musicians, that she was the chair of at the time, they made a point to have the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission dedicate a state historical marker at that site. That was in September 25th, 1994. And if that hadn't happened, that building would have been torn down. Like Tracy's saying, when she thinks of the houses that she lived in the different areas of the city and the work that was being done in the living room, and now that house is gone. There are things that we need to do. We need to recognize areas where we on our own, without funding, without foundations, we as a people on our own had buildings and organizations that were about improving our lives. That we need to look at that and make sure, like what they're doing with the theater on the Hill and other places. You know, there are so many different venues, different buildings that should be listed as historical, because they are.
Yeah,
Even go ahead, I'm sorry.
no, you go ahead, please.
I mean, I've been thinking about Pryor's Furrier. You know, how many Black Furrier companies were there in the United States, let alone, you know what I mean? That
Oh my
building
God, and I
was right
love
on.
going in there as a kid, and he would let you go
Oh
up,
my
go
goodness.
amongst the furs. Oh my God.
I mean, there are so many things that we have done just as people, just in our own entrepreneurship, that those buildings need to be secured, because their heritage, the young people have no clue or no idea that even existed.
Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of times I've forgotten about that place. You know, I never went in it, but it was. I mean, I walked by it 1,000 times. You know, I had a question about, you know, one of the things around the arts, and it feels like this was an effort of all of the women who were named, was for it to be part of popular culture, that everybody was concerned with how it could, what they knew could be get out to people, you know, and then, you know, naming Macedonia or the Hill House or the Selma Burke Art Center, or, you know, these, you know, trying to jerry-rig Pitt to do what it should do. But I'm curious also about whether you remember them ever commenting about the schools in the Hill District, and whether they wanted to be in those schools, those public schools, whether that in a way in which hundreds of kids go through on an everyday basis, and don't have this, right? And And that's insane. I've experienced that. I taught in the school, but I wasn't able to be there between 9 and 3. I had to be after 3.
Mhm.
And I just wondered about whether have you ever heard them talk about a day in trying to get in the school day, or whether they wanted to be outside the school.
Well, my mother did things in the school, both as she was, like I said, a part of the Centers for Musically Talented when it was created.
That was in
again, that was
Homewood,
after-
right? I'm sorry.
It was at Peabody. I believe it was at the old Peabody High School. I think it's
Sorry,
Obama.
there,
now.
okay.
And she started there, and then it went to that school, that middle school in Oakland. It used to be right by Children's Hospital, the old Children's Hospital.
Frick.
Yeah, they were there too for a while. But she was often asked by schools to come in and do something. Black History Month, a special occasion. And she would always come in and throw a choir together so the young people could sing and learn something. And she would make sure she'd have them do spirituals, but then she'd let them pick a song that they could sing. And then she would actually go find it, the music version of it, even if it was a popular song, whatever. But my father was in the school system, so it may have been easier for her because of him.
Okay.
He was a principal in the times when there weren't a lot of Black principals. And I'm thinking maybe because generally Pittsburgh Public School didn't really want you nowhere near.
And was he a
Helping
principal on
Black
the Hill at any time?
Heron Hill. Well, he wasn't a principal at Heron Hill. He was a teacher at Heron Hill. And it was his first school. And he taught night school at Heron Hill for adults to get their GEDs.
Mm.
Dr. Burke actually taught in Pittsburgh Public Schools. So there's some of the research I've been doing, I've come across photos of her in public schools around the city. And at one point, one of the folks who wrote about her talked about the fact that she had actually taught thousands of Pittsburgh Public School students through the art activities that she did. So one of the chains that I'm trying to follow is to get more information about that, to find out specifically what schools she taught at, and to see if Pittsburgh Public Schools own any of her artwork in their collection.
Mm-hmm.
And Justin, like I said, when my mom was at St. Richard, Hill District Catholic it's a Catholic school, but it is a poor Black Catholic school. It is not like a private school in the sense. And she was there not just every week herself, but she brought all kinds of people from the university there during the school day. But as far as being a teacher, I think she thought her sister had that covered. My aunt, her sister, was eventually vice principal of Harrisburg's only high school. And when she passed away, the alternative school in Harrisburg was named after her. So for many years, Harrisburg had a Baton Felton school that was the alternative school named after my aunt. So I think my mom figured Aunt Barb had it. And they were such contrasting figures. Like Aunt Barb was that like pillbox slingback 60s. Remember the pillbox slingback? I remember her in like glamour gloves, joined a sorority. She was like that kind of Black. She wanted me to go to Jack and Jill and I like wouldn't. She was that kind of Black person. And then my mom was like fully hippie, like Jimi Hendrix African clothes when people didn't like it. And then they sent me back and forth and wonder why I was confused all the time. But I think that Aunt Barb was a teacher. And then my Uncle Larry was also a teacher for many years in the New York City school system until he was hit over the head by a student with a baseball bat. And he was in the hospital for about a year. That was a big deal for my family. So yes, schools were always part of our life. She was raised by Black teachers, but I think she saw herself as more university level. I mean, she taught at Pitt From the time she was an undergraduate, she co-taught that class with Lloyd and went on to teach at the University of New Mexico, Albuquerque.
When did she leave Pitt?
She left Pittsburgh. Okay. I thought this was normal when I was a kid. God rest her soul. She's not alive now. I graduated from high school at 17, a year early, because I skipped a grade. She left Pittsburgh the next day and left me with this dude. She was like, I gotta write poetry. I'm out. And she went to New Mexico. It took me maybe 5 years to get mad. Like, I didn't realize at the time that that is not what you do.
Wait, what year was that?
1980.
1980. Okay. Yeah.
So she
80.
came back briefly years later for a couple years, but couldn't really get work here and went back to New Mexico. Because I would always beg her to come back. And she just would say, there isn't work for me in Pittsburgh. What am I going to do in Pittsburgh?
Mhm.
So we have a few minutes left. I'm just wondering if anybody, if any of you all have any last thoughts that you want to share with everyone before we go. Terry, I see you about to come off mute.
Yep. If you want to see Dr. Burke's work, you can actually see two really beautiful pieces that are over in the Kaufman Auditorium. One is Together, and the other is a 1936 self-portrait that she did. When Together was in my office, I would tell anybody who would listen this story. Strangers on the bus, people at the store. And one day I actually sat beside Malik Bankston. God help him. I'm telling him this story. And he was super generous and gave us like papers. But the 1936 portrait was a gift from Kingsley to Hill House. And both of the pieces are there for people to see. And my hope moving forward is working with a colleague to raise money to conserve both pieces and to research them both. And again, to write more about Dr. Burke, about those particular pieces, and to spend time at the archives at Spelman so I could touch her journals and go through the things that are stored there.
Mhm.
Thank you. And also Miss Charlotte Cobb has a portrait that she did in honor of Dr. Burke that is at MoCA. And I sent it out with the base camp too. Thank you. Miss Eugenie?
Yes. You're
Any last-
welcome.
Oh.
Yeah,
Is that your
no,
last
no,
word?
no. Yeah. Thank you and you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining. And then Miss Tracy, how about you?
Just thank you all for coming. I always appreciate people who are willing to hear my mom's story. I always wonder if I'm boring people. So it's just really nice that you were all here and wanted to listen. Thank you.
Nothing boring about anything that happened this evening. I was very moved. I believe most of us were. We had lots of heart reactions and lots of loving comments in the chat. Also, I see that Tracy put her email in here. If any of the other speakers want to share with the audience in case people have questions after. Again, this video, I recorded today's event, and I'm going to make it available so that if other members of the community were not able to attend, there's folks that have to see this. And so I want to make sure that they get to see this. So I have the video uploaded to a link, but I'm going to try to find some way to like upload it to Vimeo or YouTube or something so it's easier for folks to access. And I just really thank you. This has been a huge blessing to me, and makes me excited about what's to come. This is the second in our conversations on Black Marooning. The first was on the Hill District and its legacy around practicing Kwanzaa, and there is more to come. Any words that you want to share, Justin, before we roll?
No, just thank you. Thank you for all the stories you shared. Thanks for everyone who came. Thank you, Kendra, for the idea, and very grateful, inspired.
Likewise. Thank you all. Have a blessed night. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other.
Thank you.
Much love.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Peace.